Brothers and sisters, we are gathered here today to remember the life of FRC. Explain the difference between a receivership and a bailout. So, I'll give you a TLDR. What is a bailout? A bailout is basically when a entity, in this case a bank, takes a massive amount of loss and is going to go under. And if they go under, it could cause a ripple effect. Everybody who's invested in the bank, everybody who, whether they're investors as a shareholder, whether they are, taking out a loan from the bank or deposited bank, they're all at risk. More importantly, if one bank goes down, it could cause a domino effect. So a bailout is the government comes in and says, all right, we're going to give you tax dollars. We're going to give you the money you need to keep yourself afloat in return for something, whether it's partial control, whether it's you have to abide by new regulations, whether it's you have to give our administration's cabinet jobs at $350,000 to $400,000 salary when they get out of office. Oh, sorry. That's the quiet part out loud I'm not supposed to say. Welcome to politics, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to give you a bailout. We're going to give you the money that you need in return for something. Of course, that's your tax dollars. So you know how I always say, they're like, oh, let's raise taxes on rich people. I'm like, cool. But does the American people get to decide where that money goes? No, the government does. Wait, so then what's the point of raising it? Oh, well, if we tax billionaires, then we could pay for our medical and social programs. You're crazy if you think the government's actually going to do what they're supposed to with it. Plus taxes and shit. All right? Let's figure out where the money's going first. So there you go. There goes the bailout. Well, it's too big to fail, Stocky. You have to stop it from going because it'll have bigger effects down the road. I agree. There are certain things that are too big to fail. But here's my problem. When you tell someone they're too big to fail enough times, they start to believe they're too big to fail. And if they believe they're too big to fail, they're never going to stop doing what they did to get themselves into shitty situations, like taking super high risk trades and investments. Because, hey, we're too big to fail. So it's either moon or bailout, all right? So that's your bailout. What's your receivership? Your receivership is basically where, you know how you see on the door of the bank, it says FDIC insured? So basically, the FDIC gets to look at that bank and say, all right, we are going to insure up to $250,000 per account, no matter what happens. And the reason that this happened was because of the bank run that happened in the 1930s after the stock market crash that led to the Great Depression. Right? People get panicked that they're going to lose their money and they go pull it out and all of a sudden the bank doesn't have it because they've lent out all the money and they don't have the money to cover it, and then now they have to call in debts and it's just a domino effect. Well, in return for this, the FDIC has to be able to insure this, right? So how else does the FDIC insure? You think the FDIC is just sitting on a fucking stack of $2.5 trillion in cash in their basement saying, all right, if anything happens, guys, customers, you go ahead and you come to us and we'll give you your $250,000. No. This is basically the FDIC saying that if we get concerned that this can't happen, we are going to take over this bank, bring it into receivership. You receive something, okay? You're a receiver. So you are receiving the assets of the bank. So what that means is that if this thing gets into a point where there is concern, okay? If there is concern that this bank could actually go under, how are they going to protect that $250,000? They're going to halt this bank from doing anything additional. No lending, no taking in anything, no transactions of any kind. We are now seizing, they call it receivership because it sounds better than seizing. We are going to now seize this bank. We are going to assess how much it is worth in assets. And if we need to start selling off parts of this in order to cover enough or to make enough to cover this. So they're going to stop it. They're not going to allow anything else to do. They're going to seize it. And they're going to say, okay, here's their balance sheet. How much do they have in loans out? How much do they have in interest coming in? How much do they have in investments in equities? How much do they have overseas? How much do they have in gold? How much do they have in whatever? It's not like how much do they have in land or anything like that. No, it's like what is on their balance sheet. Well, that's kind of what happened with the other banks. We realized that these banks were operating at a big fucking loss. Like on paper, it showed that they were making, $500 billion, but it turned out that they had like $600 billion in liabilities. Or the $500 billion they had, they're not telling everybody where their investments are. And so they're like, yeah, we have $500 billion in assets. Oh, yay, it's a really good bank. Oh, by the way, we bought bonds with it. And those bonds are only making 1% return right now over 10 years. So we're not actually making any money on your money. and we can't break the bonds because we're going to take a loss. And it's going to take us 10 years to recover our money now. Because when we got in, we were 3%, or we were above inflation. This was a safe investment. The problem with a safe investment, this is why I tell you guys to be careful about locking your stuff up in CDs and stuff if you need access to your money, is that even if it's safe, it can no longer be profitable. And if you need that money and you have to break it, you're going to take a loss. And that's what happened with SIVB, right? Or SVIB. They took that loss because they had to sell their bonds to cover the loss that they had from deposit withdrawals. But when you sell your bonds, you take a L on it because you're selling them for cheaper. And you no way made up 1% a year or 2% a year and made money on that. So what the FDIC does is it takes in a receivership and says, okay, we're halting it. We're going to assess this balance sheet, see how much we have and what we need to do to either pay these people back or ensure that they have enough liquidity to keep going forward. And so that's the concern right now with FRC. You don't want to bail them out because you don't want to start a trend, but you don't want it to go into FDIC receivership because if it does, I think shit hits the fan. We've been talking about how this is the line in the sand for banks. Now, I don't mean shit hits the fan as in like we have a global fucking meltdown, but this has been the line in the sand, and this is that moment. Most people think it's going to go into receivership. I think that there's a good possibility. I think that the government is going to try to do everything they can to avoid that, or at least the Fed is, because we just got some sense of stability on banks, and if they go into receivership after all the money that was pumped into them and they still couldn't be saved, we start this all over again. Theoretically speaking, if you had around $100,000 to invest in the market, 401k and IRA were all set, how would you go about building a personal investment portfolio? If I was well off to the point where my 401k, IRA were maxed out, I owned a home, I had no debt, and I just had $100,000 laying out, I would start putting that aside for my future me. I would start looking at some shit that matures in a long time. Like I don't believe in I don't like 30-year bonds or anything like that, but I would just start putting some stuff in for future me. I'm set now. Let me put something away that's gonna, you know what I would be doing? I'd be looking at some fucking corporate bonds, because with money getting so tight right now and so expensive, corporations are fucking, if you're able to access it, are giving out corporate bonds at ridiculously high rates. And we're talking 10, 20-year bonds at like 5-6%. Obviously they give a higher return because there's more risk because a corporation could go underwater. But I mean, if you have access to corporate bonds right now for companies that are like not fucking, like unicorns or venture capitalists or startups or SPACs or something like that, that's probably where I would put my money if I had that ability. My thing is that when somebody asks me, Stocky, I have X amount of dollars and I want to put it somewhere, but I want too much risk, right? They're like, I want to buy a house in a year, but I have $100,000. I don't want to put it in the market because I don't know if the market goes down, I need to have this money for my house. I don't want to leave it in cash because it's going to die. What is something I can do? Then it's easy. It's like, okay, put it in something that's going to give you 5% for a year, right? You're not going to lose any money. You're going to gain 5%, so you're not losing against inflation, and you still have access to your money. And you don't want to put it in something like a CD or something like a bond, because if you need the money, like if that's something you need, like let's say all of a sudden the perfect house pops up 3 months earlier and you're like, I got to make a bid on this house or I'm going to lose it. You don't want your money locked up in something that you have to then sell at a loss, right? Because when you resell a bond, normally in this market, maybe not, but when you resell a bond, you're usually selling it on the market and it's going to be, depending on when you sell it, you're probably going to take a loss. When you break a CD, you take a penalty, right? So it's like you have to leave that money in because the bank wants their guarantee. So it just really depends on what it is. I like having a little bit less return, but access to the money if I need it.